Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to today's community webcast. What's new in CA Single Sign-On 12.8, presented here today by Mehlhorn. Just a note, we'll take questions using the Q&A. Just be sure to ask the question of everyone. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Herb.
Thank you very much, Chris. And thanks to everybody who has joined us here for the next 58 minutes. I'm happy to be able to share with you this material and look forward to also sharing a little bit more about how the world will evolve for CA Single Sign-On out beyond 12.8. So there's a little bit forward-looking material in this as well, and hope to be able to cover both and then answer any questions that you might post in the Q&A form. The agenda will go like this. We're going to very lightly touch on the CA Single Sign-On strategy, describe the features that are part of the 12.8 release, which occurred a couple of weeks ago now. There's some other important information to be shared with you related to a variety of different topics, and so I wanted to make sure we covered some other topics, things like end of service, some additional guidance we've added to our product info, and then again, as I indicate, a little bit of a preview of some aspects that will change on the validation site, which are themselves precursors of work that we'll be doing going forward. So hopefully when you come out of this meeting or this call, you'll have a pretty clear understanding of the 12.8 capabilities, and you'll also have, again, sort of this preview. So backing up to the top and just discussing strategy initially at a superficial level within the overall CA business, at the top sort of most surface level, is our view that every business is in the software business. Everything that you do as an organization, in the way you try to reach and communicate with your constituents, either people perhaps who are buying services or products from you, or subscribing to some service you provide, or are citizens of your geography or your government organization. Every process that you're following is trying to understand the needs of that end customer base, that end constituent base better, and you're doing that primarily with software. And so a key aspect of that, obviously, is the experience the end users have with your software. You are trying on an ongoing basis to make it easier for them and give them a digital experience that allows you to continue to serve them and provide them, a value and maintain them as your customers in sort of a happy state, in a satisfied state. Certainly, as you're trying to do that, you want to expand and supply more and more information and get more and more information back. That requires security. You want to do that in a way that has high confidence for yourself and also for your organization. So this is the picture that we draw when we describe the overall strategy associated with what CA is doing in the marketplace. We're essentially delivering capabilities and services to your organization so you can be a modern software factory. And we view that the ability to do that falls into generally 4 categories. They aren't always serial in nature, as this picture describes, but it does give you a sense that we understand that to do that successfully, you ideally achieve and have capabilities in these 4 dimensions that are as good as they can be. So in the area of agility, it's about being able to change direction when and as necessary, but do so in a thoughtful and managed way. Automation is about the ability to execute the delivery of what you're trying to do as quickly as possible and as predictably as possible. Insights is where you want to use information that you can gather out of your interaction with your customers to better understand what you need to do. And again, the security element is critical to enable the ability to deliver more and more information that's more valuable and more useful, but at the same time in a way that is secure and allows your organization to continue to do so without losing track of that information and exposing it to people or places that you really don't want it exposed to. So this is the CA strategy in aggregate, and where CA single sign-on fits into that is pretty straightforward. This statement describes that our intention on an ongoing basis is to deliver a solution within a broader IAM solution that CA offers that's easy to adopt, allows you to achieve rapid time to value, can support modern deployment architectures and standards to, in essence, be an enabling element of your modern software factory. So that's what we're working on. When we delivered 12.8,
I think you're cutting out a little bit. I think you might be cutting out a little bit. Not sure if it's just me.
Okay. Let me know if you find it any better. I'll keep going, and then you can tell me if the audio is coming in better for you. So with the 12.8 release, we had some decisions to make. What was the sort of the nature of the focus that we wanted to achieve with 12.8? And so we looked at a couple of different dimensions, typically, as we think about our release, there are a couple things that we consider. We consider building technology that is related to authentication and authorization. We consider architectural changes. We consider a range of different possible themes. With 12.8, the major emphasis, the major priority was developing capabilities that extend authentication authorization capabilities. As you'll see when we talk about the validation site later on, there are some architectural and deployment changes that are likely to show themselves more in the validation site. So quick parity check, Chris, is the audio better? I think you're there, Chris. All right. So I'm not hearing anything further from Chris, so perhaps the audio part was his side. Okay, so 12.8 features. Let's go into those, which is the main segment of this of the presentation. So I'm going to start with some of the sort of the simpler elements of the release. So one of the things we did in 12.8 is we did a little improvement in the security associated with what I refer to as trust-based authentication schemes. So there are aspects of authentication schemes within CA SSO that are actually trusting other elements of the overall infrastructure to do the full set of authentication. X509 certification, Windows-based auth, and in some places custom authentication schemes can have aspects of trust associated with them. So what we wanted to do was improve that security, and we did that by providing the opportunity to bind the IP address to the authentication scheme. And so a simple schematic here shows, look, in the policy server, let's assume an authentication is coming from an agent that is on the whitelist, that will be accepted. If it's coming from an agent that's not on the whitelist, it will not be accepted. It's a pretty simple concept, and I think everybody probably understands it. And the implementation of this was specifically and primarily for these authentication schemes that are noted in the colored block there on the left-hand side. So that's one piece of improvement. Another piece of improvement we made was, in the area of authentication, was the ability to support compact JOT tokens natively as an authentication scheme available in CA SSO. And why did we do that? Well, one use case is noted there at the top. There may be a mobile-based application that has been developed with the CA Mobile Gateway SDK. It's going to want to connect and get information from some back-end application via an API call. It's going to work its way through the API MAG gateway, and a more comfortable native authentication token type used in that kind of a flow is a JOT token. So by virtue of adding this authentication scheme within SSO, we can now support the more native, simpler integration between CA API MAG for authenticating a user and perhaps supplying some information back about that particular user. But it becomes a simpler proposition to connect these pieces together in a way that natively is easier and simpler to apply. So that's one use case. The second use case certainly can be, as noted down at the bottom, is there maybe an application that wants to call CA SSO directly, supply a JOT token for the purpose of authenticating the user, and have access to a supported backend environment, like in this picture, simply Apache web server. One thing you'll note on the slide is just below where it says JWT, it says OIDC ID token, because the ID token in the OIDC flow is purely a JOT token. So it is also feasible for the CA SSO Access Gateway to accept an OIDC ID token in a sort of resource server flow and provide access to, again, a resource that is protected by CA SSO. So those two use cases, one where we can more seamlessly integrate with API management kind of tool sets, and one where normally under a variety of different conditions you might want to use a JOT token as a form of authentication, 12.8 makes feasible. In the area of application support, historically, the CA SSO Access Gateway has supported the ability to call it directly through a REST API call or a SOAP call and ask CA SSO to authenticate or authorize some action. So the application can call SSO directly without needing an agent, although in this case there is a piece of business logic that is resident in the Access Gateway that can support the ability to authenticate an action or validate an authentication or authorize some transaction. And what we did is we expanded support in the Access Gateway so that historically we had support for XML over REST. With 12.8, the Access Gateway can support JSON over REST. And one other piece based on the implementation of the JOT authentication, that JSON over REST transaction can support the ability of using a compact JOT token for authentication. So again, the overall reason for doing this is applications make it simpler to use sort of an agent list-based approach. It's not a component list-based approach because there is a component here called CA SSO Access Gateway, but it is an agentless-based approach by which an application can make a call to SSO directly for authentication or authorization and do it using JSON over REST, and, if desirable, use a JOT token for authentication. So the next set of materials starts to dig in pretty deeply into OpenID Connect enhancements that were part of the 12.8 release. And we'll go through these bit by bit, but I wanted to also, again, sort of follow the same format of what it is that we did and why, sort of a little bit of additional information about how and where it's used and where the value is. So OpenID Connect comes with this concept of a refresh token. The refresh token is typically a long-lived token that can be used to refresh one of the other tokens or multiple of the other tokens. And so typically people have shorter timeouts on access tokens, and the use of the refresh token will allow the ability to go back to the token provider, in this case CA SSO, and get a new access token. So you can have a situation where the access token times out and the refresh token can be used to go get a new access token on a periodic basis until, of course, the refresh token itself will have a lifetime that will eventually time out. You do this because with the refresh token, it makes end user experience a little simpler. Fewer times that a user has to re-authenticate The other thing that's possible with the refresh token is if you send a refresh token and you configure it this way, the access token that comes back can support a narrowed scope of entitlements, so to speak. So there are some beneficial elements of using the refresh token in combination with getting new access tokens. You don't cause the user to have to re-authenticate, and conceivably, the new access token could have a narrowed form of entitlements. Proof key exchange code, which is a typo, that should say code exchange, so that's my error. It's PKCE. I saw this error on a different slide deck and I changed it on the other one, but I didn't change it here, so my error. But it's PKCE, and its basic purpose in life is if you're using OpenID Connect authorization code flow, this is an inline method to cryptographically, securely identify an OpenID client. That's its purpose in life. Its intent is to block possible intercept of the authorization code and misuse of the OpenID protocol. So PKCE is highly valuable when you're working with public OpenID clients, and you want to make sure that there isn't an unauthorized interception and access and use of the authorization code. Implicit Flow is a separate flow associated with OpenID Connect interactions. It's a lighter flow, and what I mean by lighter, it has fewer request responses, which means it's a lot better suited for things like single-page apps, because fewer redirects can be important performance issues with single-page apps that are going to be looking for refreshes or looking for smaller bytes and bits of information associated with the information displayed to the end user. And so it's really the better approach for a single-page app. It's not the only approach, but it is viewed as the better approach for single-page apps. And essentially, the interaction between the OpenID Connect client and the OpenID Connect provider, in this case CA SSO, is that you don't have an interaction with an authorization code flow. And so there are also elements of security that are a little bit different here, but it's a simpler and more preferred approach when working with single-page apps. And so again, Implicit Flow was added as part of the 12.8 release. Introspection End Point was essentially an evolution of something that we did within the 12.7 release, where we had a validation endpoint. But the introspection endpoint is an expansion of that. And what the validation endpoint did was just to make sure and give the opportunity for an OpenID Connect client to determine if the access token was valid or not. But with 12.7, that's as far as it went. With 12.8, we expand that so that now we can also provide scope data back to the OpenID Connect client, and conceivably you could have an implementation that allows that information to be used with more than one application. So essentially the introspection endpoint starts to give greater flexibility in terms of integration and getting what's referred to as scope information back from CA SSO by making a request of this introspection endpoint. With 12.8, it's introspection, not just purely validation. So that's part of 12.8 as well. Step-up authentication with authentication context request. So that's, the purpose for this is really, parallel to how authentication context request is used within SAML. In fact, there's an awful lot of parallels between OpenID Connect and SAML, because they're basically both fundamental federation protocols that do things in slightly different ways, but are meant to achieve much of the same end result. And so elements of how CA SSO works with OpenID Connect are going to start to even become more apparent if you start comparing them with the way SSO works with SAML-based federation, and you'll see more of that in the couple of slides ahead where we sort of close off on the capabilities that are there within the OpenID Connect features of 12.8. So one of the things that can be achieved here is an OpenID Connect client can make an authentication authorization request to SSO and include the authentication context, which would drive SSO to only issue the OpenID Connect tokens if a user authenticates at the required level. And there are ways, if you've done this with SAML-based federation, there are elements of the SSO admin UI which allow you to set the templates that are used for executing the authentication request support. You can also use SSO for step-up authentication such that if a user has a valid SM session, but you want the user, when they're getting an OpenID Connect token, to be forced to step up to a stronger or different form of authentication, that also can be achieved. This sort of concept of authentication context request enables CA SSO to dynamically determine and respond to what the OpenID Connect client requires for authentication. So, you know, there are elements of value here related to improved security controls and ability to dynamically respond to the needs of the OpenID Connect client with respect to authentication authorization. So I hope that helps there. Finally, that's not the end of the set of things that were done with OpenID Connect. There are a number of more. In the interest of time for this presentation, I don't go into all of them sort of slide by slide as I've done for the last few, because the last few were pretty important. Not that these aren't, but again, just in the interest of time, I made a selection here. But there are additional OpenID Connect enhancements, and I'll point out two of them on this summary, and then I'd refer you to the tech info to see it in more detail. But one of them is this user attribute mapping capability. CA SSO has an interesting native ability to bring information together from heterogeneous repositories. This attribute mapping capability exists with our SAML-based federation, and now we've added it to OpenID Connect, and essentially what it allows you to do is define a single logical variable and then have a bunch of different tools to map that logical variable to a actual data representation that's in a different schema located in different repositories. And so attribute mapping has been added to support OpenID Connect here. That's one item. The second one I'll just mention here briefly is the custom URI as a redirect URI. If I go back to the last slide, essentially what happens is when the OpenID Connect client communicates to SSO, it includes a redirect URI so information can get back to the OpenID Connect client. And prior to 12.8, the redirect URI had to start with HTTP or HTTPS. With 12.8, it now is something that supports a broader customization of what that redirect URI should be. And again, I'd encourage you to take a look at the product documentation to understand more of the details on that front. But I think those are two more I'll just mention here on this slide, and then you can see the other ones listed here. And again, the release notes, I think, give you a good set of information about these elements, and they point you to a deeper set of material that's available in the technical information available online. So here's a simple use case that I wanted to describe also. We have a customer who's doing this. Essentially, what this is making use of OpenID Connect and enabling that integration to allow for the use case that's described at the bottom, which is a user saying to a Echo device, you know, hey Alexa, what is my financial organization XYZ account balance? And Alexa having the ability then as a result of integration with SSO, and SSO in turn integrating with financial app to provide back, your balance of the financial organization, XYZ is whatever the number is. I just used $4,500 here, it could be whatever. But the way this works is simply the end user gets online and links their account to the account that CA SSO has associated with the financial app. And at the time the end user is looking to get the information from the financial app, again, in this simple single example is Alexa skill will make an authorization request to SSO. SSO in turn will allow the end user to authenticate. The authorization code is supplied back to the Alexa skill. Alexa skill then requests a access token. The access token is provided back to Alexa skill, and Alexa skill can then ask for end user attributes such as account balance. So we have customers today who are doing this, and I offer this as sort of a simple example. When people think about OpenID Connect, there are a number of different places it could be used. This is one where it is being used today with CA SSO. Another potential use case, perhaps there are single-page apps that an organization wants to deploy in some sort of on-premise or cloud-based environment. Again, you can use CA SSO with the access gateway in an environment where there is a ability to supply and execute the OpenID Connect based protocol that allows applications to get necessary attribute information about a user, entitlement sort of information about a user in order for the end user and that application to interact, and can do so over a stateless form of communication. So this is another use case, and the last piece I'll sort of display as a picture is the concept of this also being a potential and supported scenario. There are a number of organizations who have parts of the CA SSO componentry running in cloud-based environments. The CA GIS organization itself uses such a structure, and you can use OpenID Connect for these kinds of purposes as well. Additional enhancements that are there in 12.8, there's some administrative UI improvements. We have an annual Net Promoter Score survey we consume information out of the Net Promoter Score survey. We try to focus on key areas that we can make some changes and differences, that we think some of them bigger, some of them smaller. In this example, we went and executed some additional usability tests with customers, extracted some of the key things that they pointed out. There's more to be done here, we know, but we've made some changes as well, and one of the examples here is there's some additional searching and sorting improvements made in the 12.8 release that you'll see. And then additionally, the running the policy server admin UI, the SDK, and the access gate one on Windows 2016 is what is there as well. So these are some of the round out, if you will, sort of platform-based improvements. But again, just sort of summarizing 12.8, it's really very much focused on changes that we've made related to authentication authorization with, as you can see, a pretty solid and heavy focus related to OpenID Connect. So with that, I'm going to transition to some other important information that I want to share with you before we wind up. And again, by virtue of looking at the clock and looking at where we are, I think we'll probably be completed 10 to 15 minutes from now, and happy to take questions at that point to see if we can get through as many of those as possible. So some things that we've been doing that perhaps are not as visible because they don't get specific announcements, but I did want to point them out to you. We have within the product documentation provided some guidance on how to deploy in AWS and Azure The little sort of breadcrumb direction of where you find that information is noted here. And, you know, you could go to the tech info and probably just simply search on public cloud infrastructure and it would find you the exact page. But if you wanted to find it through this process, it's in the implementing section under multiple data centers, and there's some help and guidance there. Certainly it is not exhaustive in nature. There's a whole lot more that you'd have to think about, but it tries to give you the kind of guidance and help that allow you to think about those sort of implementations and deployment processes. And then the other thing that we have done, and I know a number of people are aware of this, but there are certainly more that probably are not, and I know also that there are a number of customers who have deployed in this form, is you know, how to deploy a web agent in an auto-scaling environment. And again, here's sort of the breadcrumbs to get there, but if you go to the tech info and just search on dynamically scaled, it will get you there as well. And it describes how you can enable the implementation of an agent in such a way that it will scale up and down based on performance demands within things like a Docker container. Again, just to add a little bit of a point to that, I know we have a number of customers who have done this very thing and are using the agents in this fashion. End of service guidance. The end of service that we've announced applies to the policy server, the admin UI, sort of the server end of the implementation, not agents. 12.51 is end of service. It went beyond its end of service date at the end of April. The 12.52 release is going to go end of service at the end of February 2019. So, you know, sort of 3 quarters away from now, I think, roughly. And it's important to plan your upgrades. And the guidance that we have is to upgrade to 12.8. It has the longest mainstream life, 4-year life associated with it. It includes all aggregate defect fixes from all the CRs and service packs of all earlier versions of SSO. Obviously, based on some of the material here, it's got the greatest feature content and value. And some other key points to keep in mind, there are global delivery modules that perhaps some of you use that have, there is a certification roadmap for those, so you can see when those are going to be rolled out and support at 12.8 over the next 2 months, I think. And then if you're coming from a 12.51 or 5.2, you've got to look at whether you have any 32-bit custom code or code that's been developed on Java where you might need to recompile and rebuild that and make sure that that's available and ready, because obviously 12.6, 12.7, and 12.8 are 64-bit platforms, and so if you're migrating from 12.5x, you're going to need to make sure you cover that base before you make the move. And I'd also highly encourage you to take advantage of what CA services or CA partners can offer. A range of offerings to help do, you know, readiness assessment all the way through probably to doing the full upgrade for you. And again, take advantage of those services where you think you need to. If you go to the CA SSO homepage, product page, you take a look at the 12.8 GA announcement, because embedded in there is also the summary of sort of the end of service, and it also has links to things related to upgrades, so please take a look at that if you need more detail, but it's important to do that. And as you can tell, every release that we make going forward, we're going to also be announcing its mainstream life. And I know there are a number of people who've asked me about why are we doing that, and really the point is transparency. So if you're on 12.5.2 and you're thinking to make a migration, you should know the duration of the item that you're going to migrate to. And we want to continue to offer that, so when we release something, you have a very good picture of how long its life is going to be, and you can make the best decision for your organization as possible. And I think that transparency is helpful. So our plan is to continue to offer that kind of information to you as we go forward. Another piece of information, there are some, in addition to this material that we're covering here, we've done other webinars that we think might be helpful. In March, we executed a presentation called Agentless Access Management. And tomorrow, interestingly enough, we have another one that focuses on DevOps meets CA SSO. And you can visit this location, www.ca.com/security-webcasts. I think there you can view the webcasts that have been completed and posted, and you can also sign up for the ones that are coming. So there's one tomorrow. I expect we'll have another one coming up later on, estimated roughly end of June, early July, which will focus on OpenID Connect and some of the characteristics and capabilities of tying capabilities within CA SSO to an OpenID Connect flow. Additionally, we do monthly SSO roadmap webinars. They're, as we're in the middle of work on a particular version, the webinars don't change that much. What you will see in the next webinar that we give on SSO roadmap is an evolution, obviously, because we've just released 12.8 and we're starting into our planning and activity around the work that we're going to do next. And so there will be, over the next 2 months, there will be some ongoing evolution of the content that gets presented in those webinars. So take a look at that and let members of your team know if that is of interest to your organization. Changes coming to the validation site. This is really, I've mentioned this to a number of folks, maybe many of you know this. What we try to do is follow an agile development method. We expose as much as we can, as soon as we can, in terms of code we're building, designs we think we're going to implement, and then we look for commentary and feedback, make course adjustments as we can. I'm sure it's hard for with the volume of information that flows at you on this phone and at me, sometimes it's hard to tune into all the channels of information that are available to you and use them effectively. But this is going to be there on an ongoing basis. Once you sign up for the validation site, it doesn't change release to release. We just roll the content there, so you'll continually be able to sort of tune in and see what's going on at your discretion. But if you're interested in that, you would go to validate.ca.com and you would select the CA Single Sign-On Customer Validation Program. There are two actually in there. There's one that says Customer Validation, and then there's one that says, I think it's Internal Only, which is really meant for CA employees to be able to see a bunch of things that aren't yet really ready for public exposure. So for you, your best place is CA Single Sign-On Customer Validation Program. And if you enroll there, what you're able to do and see is participate in this private space. You have to use your CA Single Sign, you have to use your CA support credentials to get access. But once you're there are forums, i.e. topics, and you can see some of the designs as they're going to be generated. We start posting pre-release versions for customers to download and test. With 12.8, we also posted or created, I think it was somewhere in the vicinity of a half a dozen to a dozen implementations on AWS. So if you couldn't necessarily have the ability to download in your own environment, we still were providing ways for which you could test some of the newer capabilities in a place where we posted pre-release versions on AWS. And then obviously the content is going to evolve as the programs progress. And we look at collecting feedback, doing what we can to adjust our target, our design, our implementation, based on commentary and feedback, and that has worked better and better over the period of time in which we've been doing this. So I think we on our side are getting better at responding and trying to adjust, and I think more organizations and customers are giving us feedback earlier, and it translates into a little bit of a win-win for both of us. So what you'll see going forward, because 12.8 was just released, is there are some forums, i.e. topics there, that are going to be refreshed and continue. integration with threat analytics as a service, an embedded policy store. So this is where parts of the development work at 12.8 were again highly focused on authentication authorization. In the next release, it will probably be a little bit of a hybrid release. We will continue to do some work around authentication and authorization. I expect, though, some elements of architectural changes will also start to show themselves. So the embedded policy store is an area where what we want to do is encapsulate a store within SSO policy server itself, which is where we keep and maintain all data that is only useful and valuable to CA SSO. So this is not about user stores or end user attributes per se. This is about just the data that SSO itself only cares about, nobody else really cares about. And ideally what we will do is provide more on the validation site in relationship to our thinking on that front. And again, the validation site's also there so that you can start seeing some code as it develops. We will refresh and now update some additional things we expect to do in relationship to OpenID Connect. And so those forums will get a little bit of a revamp, you know, sort of on a projection basis. Expected that will take place between now and roughly mid-June. And then additional forms will start to show up, a Docker container format for SSO components, integration with multi-factor as a service that would be an out-of-the-box capability when you install CA SSO, additional work in authentication chaining. So if I go to my community site and look at the voting there, you know, one of the higher requested items is the ability to have an authentication scheme that is essentially the result of chaining Kerberos and forms that allows a automatic failover to forms if Kerberos is not available. We're also expecting to evolve and incorporate forums that relate to regulation-oriented improvements, GDPR and EIDAS, which are primarily outgrowths coming out of EMEA, but also have applicability to organizations that are not just EMEA-based organizations. And then NIST 863-3, and specifically it's NIST 863-C, which is where federation evolution is being treated within this particular NIST standard space. So watch for some of those changes. The details will be TBD, but that will start to introduce itself within the validation site. And you will probably see some other things that I don't yet want to or can mention, but the validation site will start to have that rollover taking place again between now and roughly middle of June. So that's the material that I wanted to communicate, and again, my intent was to make sure that you left this meeting with a pretty solid understanding of the capabilities in 12.7, sorry, excuse me, 12.8, the relationship of what we're doing to the overall CA strategy, some other important, I think, key information that you want to be aware of that was embedded in that middle section, and then a little bit of a summary of what you will see from a validation perspective and a validation site content going forward, which again gives you a sense of areas that we will be working pretty diligently on to translate into a release. And again, the aspects of focus that you see reflected there relate to improving the ability of the solution to be deployed quickly, improving and reducing the componentry of the solution, and continuing to enhance capabilities around authentication authorization relative to the modern software factory. So that's the backdrop I have. I'm happy to now switch gears and take a look at any Q&A that has been raised and see if I can answer them and see what is listed there.
Yeah, so folks, if you want to ask a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A tab. Just be sure to ask of everyone so we're sure to see it. Looks like there's a couple questions in there for you, Herb.
So one of the questions is, CA SSO is only certified to support basic or IDC. When it will be fully certified? So we actually executed another certification. So there is as you can see, a sort of a growing range of OpenID Connect capabilities that are specific to the OpenID standard, and also that relate and give us opportunity to leverage some of the strengths of capability that CA SSO has in conjunction with those standards. We're going to just continue to build out capabilities on that. I always have a challenge, and I really don't try to duck these questions, but just again, frankly, there's the combination of putting together the commentary in a public place of a feature set with a defined date creates revenue recognition issues for my financial organization here at CA. It makes it a challenge with my finance team, so I can't do that. But again, I will say to you, your best cycle of place to go get data is going to be the validation site. You'll see some things that we're going to do there, and we're going to continue to move that ball forward. And again, frankly, we've got really, I think, good engagement because there are some specific commentaries we're getting from organizations of elements they would like to see added, and we're going to do our best to respond to those things and make sure they happen. But so I can't answer your question as specifically as you want, but again, I'll do my best to continue to give you the ability to see what we're doing and understand the progress that we're intending to make. So we expect to continue to go forward. And I'd also ask you to come back to one of the roadmap presentations. I'll be able to share a little bit more explicit detail on the what, but not exactly the when. And so I encourage that. Next question, is embedded policy store mean that I can bundle application policies into a policy server? Yeah, essentially think of your policy store today as this external data store that you're using. Yeah, and what we're going to do is we're going to put that component inside the policy server itself, so that we, whatever data we need to consume as policy objects is part of the policy server itself. And there are multiple reasons for doing that. One of them will become clearer as we start to containerize the solution. Anyways, I hope that will help. There's a question here that says, when will 12.7 EOS? There is an announcement. I can't remember the date on the top of my head, but I know who's asking the question. I recognize your name. I'm happy to send you an email outside that just sends you the link to the end of service date for 12.7.2. It's on our external website, but I don't remember off the top of my head. So I'll be happy to do that after the call. Changes to 12.8, it appears to say it's putting more focus on the access gateway. Given that no update to agents in a long time, are you considering agents mature? Probably want to see upgrades to them. So this is a question I get on a regular basis. The answer is, actually, we have been updating the agents, but we've been updating them in cumulative releases as part of 12.5.2 base. So, what we haven't done is made key functional changes. We have been updated libraries and versions and testing and all that sort of stuff, but not functional changes per se. We have that in mind, but I don't have a specific date for you right now that I can share, but I did want to say that certainly a lot of what we've tried to do drives business logic changes that we have an ability to implement within the access gateway. So again, come back to me on this topic probably, again, sort of in the June timeframe, and I hope to have an ability to give you more specifics there. But I do expect, actually I know, we're going to have to make agent updates. I just don't have the particular timeline outlined in a way that I could communicate, because I know you want to use that and make plans around it. So come back to me on that. I will have that, and we will have to have agent updates. So yes. One thing I will note is if you go to the fix strategy document that's posted, you'll see a refresh coming on application server agents. And I believe our target date is communicated in that fix strategy document is roughly before the end of June, and I'm thinking that we might be a little bit off on that, but you can see that we've got some things going with updates on the application server agents, and with web agents, again, I know we're going to have additional updates, so yes, there will be, but I can't give you the specific date on that yet. Is the latest version of SM Walker supported with 12.8? There is a certification roadmap that the global delivery team, basically this is the team that builds SM Walker, have created and have posted. So there is a version of SM Walker that is intended for support with 12.8. What I would advise there is that's posted. You know what I'd advise real quickly is just shoot a note into the CA support team, because they will probably have the location of that pretty readily available, and they can tell you exactly what that will be. Okay, scrolling down, sorry. Okay, so a question is about the future. So do you support any other directory as embedded policy store? Is it just CA directory as a policy store? The answer is, frankly, we will incorporate into the policy server. Oh, actually, let me read it. Hang on a second. Maybe I read this wrong. Nope, this is about embedded. Okay, so we will incorporate into the SSO policy server a data store. The data store is going to be a derivative of CA directory. It's not going to be the full-blown CA directory. It's going to be a element of CA directory that allows us to just do the small aspect of what we need to do. And that's going to be the intent. We will still support external policy stores. It's not that we won't, we will. But our intent is, over time, to get everybody to use the embedded policy store, because, again, frankly, it'll reduce our testing, our cost. It will improve the efficiency of your deployment and upgrades. And in the long run, everybody will win-win. But that's, you know, the way that strategy will roll out is to be determined. The details of it aren't specific. So that's our goal. We are planning to upgrade from 12.5.2 to 12.7. I recommend going to 12.8. If you haven't done, if you aren't deep into your testing on 12.7, like almost, you know, a week away from production use, you are so much better going to 12.8 for all the reasons that are noted in the slides that were used above. Scrolling down further, and there are a lot of questions. I'll try and cover as many as I can in the 6 minutes we have. Any changes with the CA SSO 12.8 integration with advanced authentication? The sort of direct and simple answer is no. Certainly, we did and have executed testing for the integration. We didn't make any code/functional changes to the nature of that integration. But stay tuned. As part of the validation material, you probably will see something there which will give you a sense of changes potentially for the future. Okay. If we want to use 12.8 now, are all other CA components available, i.e. SM Walker? I kind of responded to the SM Walker part in the earlier thread. Archive Advanced Authentication, yes, we have a we have a platform support matrix we published, say that 5 times fast, that that covers the integration that and the testing and the version support that we have across a range of components, including advanced authentication. The SM Walker item, I would again sort of encourage a quick shot of information to the support team who can point you to the what was I saying, to the certification plan for SM Walker with 12.8. Another question related to advanced authentication integrated with SSO, which again I think I've answered, so I will skip that one. In which future release embedded policy store included with SSO policy server? I can't answer that. I can only say that what you'll see in the validation site is work that will go forward on that. And the way Agile works is not helpful when predicting things with certainty in the future, but what we will do is we'll ship it when it's ready, and we'll know it's ready because customers will test, and we'll try to address issues that that have been raised. And when we think it's all said and done, then when that release train comes along, that's the next release train, we'll ship it. But you can expect a pretty substantive effort to be visible in the validation site. And as we get to the point where it looks like it's ready, you'll be able to see that. So I expect you'll have better ability to see that at that point. I can't predict with certainty on that. There is a pretty good set of material. If you look out on the validation site now and you go to that topic and you search for all the content, not just in the last 30 days, because I think by default it only wants to show you stuff that was posted in the last 30 days, but if you look at stuff that was posted for all time in that content, there's a really extensive presentation that will take you sort of step by step through what we're thinking, and you can take a look at that. Is AD LDS supported in 12.8? The answer isn't 100% certain to me. I know AD certainly is. I can't remember what we did on LDS. The platform support matrix would cover that with specificity, and that's posted and available on the download site, so you can take a look at that there. Can we have this PPT presentation? It was very, very good. Chris, I think this is recorded. I think people can see it. I'm not sure what the policy is with regard to making the actual PPT itself available. I don't know.
We'll post the recording and a PDF of the presentation.
PDF. Okay, cool. Thank you. Are there any plans to provide CA SSO Access Gateway and Policy Server and Admin UI as a virtual appliance? I direct you again, sort of, if you will, to what we are starting to expose on the validation site as a Docker format. So does that qualify as a virtual appliance? No, but I think if you kind of scan around, you can understand a little bit of the difference between what a container is and what a virtual appliance is, and from a end purpose in life, they're very similar in nature. So, but there are definitely some differences that are important, both from a using and licensing standpoint. Is that embedded policy store in 12.8? It's not in 12.8. Just clarity. Anything that I talk about that is related to validation is sort of a precursor or preview of work that's going to be a future-based work. What's in 12.8 is specifically what I had in the slides as saying in 12.8. So hopefully that clarifies that point. Can we use 12.8 Access Gateway with a 12.7 SiteMiner environment? No, we typically don't want higher versioned endpoints to work with earlier versioned policy servers. So, so you would match up the 12.8 Access Gateway with the 12.8 policy server, and there's good reason for that. There's business logic in the 12.8 Access Gateway that the 12.7 administrative interface doesn't know anything about and couldn't help you with, because there are parallel pieces that have to upgrade between the business logic of the Access Gateway and your ability to manage it in an administrative interface that has the right selections and choices that can be made, and that doesn't exist in 12.7. Okay, so that was a ton of questions, and we're running out of time. So again, I just wanted to say there were two other questions, no, actually two others. I said to somebody I would send them a link to the 12.7.02 end of service. There were two other questions here. Any questions that are left here that I haven't answered, I will get email addresses and respond to people who ask them. I think hopefully that can all happen today. So thank you everybody for your time. And Chris, I'll turn over any final comments you want to make.
Thank you everyone for participating today. Thank you, Herb, for presenting. Again, we'll have the recording up on the presentation by the end of the week. And with that, I wish everybody a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.